They fined me $850 for unapproved parking on common ground, even though the spot is printed on my deed map. Lot 22B, Section 3. I framed the notice, dated April 14th, right above my mortgage statement, so I'd never forget how they started this. Welcome to my channel. I'm Daniel Whitaker, a civil engineer from Cedar Ridge, Arizona. I've lived here 12 years, paid every HOA fee, trimmed every bush to code. If you've ever dealt with an overreaching homeowners association, you already know how this story tastes: dry paper, cold coffee, and a fine for breathing wrong. Before we dive in, take a second to subscribe so you don't miss the next case I take on. And tell me where you're watching from. I'm curious how far HOA madness travels. My trouble began the day Mrs. Pennington's son came home from college in his new Porsche. Shiny red, loud, smelling like credit approval and exhaust. He parked it right on my assigned space, the one I'd kept clean since 2013. I walked over, polite at first, and said, "Hey, that's my spot." He laughed, and said, "Mom's on the board. She said it's fine for a few weeks." A few weeks turned into 2 citations and a scratch on my bumper. The HOA president, Mr. Klein, called it a parking dispute between neighbors. Then came the letter with the $850 fine and a threat to tow my truck. I'd promised my late wife, Ruth, that I'd keep this house no matter what. She loved the magnolia by the drive. Losing the spot felt like losing another piece of her, so instead of shouting, I went quiet and started reading. That night, I downloaded the HOA bylaws, the CCRs, and the 2015 parcel amendment. 432 pages of fine print, scanned and crooked. By 2 a.m., I'd found my first crack. A discrepancy between the recorded plat and the enforcement map. My spot wasn't common ground. It was deeded private use easement, recorded under County Instrument number 15-4421. That made the fine illegal. But I didn't say a word. You never tip your hand early. I kept parking on the street, documenting every day the Porsche sat there. Date, time, photo. 33 days, precisely. On day 34, I received a final demand letter. Pay within 10 days or face lien proceedings. I slipped the letter into a plastic binder labeled Exhibit A. My engineer's brain clicked on. This wasn't about one spot. It was about a pattern of selective enforcement. Knowledge nugget number 1. Under Arizona's Planned Communities Act, ARS 33-1903, an HOA cannot fine an owner without giving specific notice and opportunity for hearing, and it sure can't fine for property it doesn't control. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office. The clerk, Janine, recognized me from zoning hearings. "You again, Dan? Trouble with the ridge?" "Define trouble," I said, sliding her the parcel number. She printed the official map, seal and all. "See this?" she said, tapping with a red nail. "Your driveway and that adjacent spot, private use. You're in the clear." I bought 3 certified copies, notarized them, and left with the kind of satisfaction you can taste in your teeth. Still, I stayed quiet. Let them build their case. A week later, a notice appeared on my mailbox. Unauthorized signage prohibited. Someone had reported the laminated private parking lot 22B sign I'd posted. They fined me again, $150. This time, the envelope smelled faintly of perfume and entitlement. Mrs. Pennington's scent, no doubt. I walked next door that evening, knocked once. She opened in a silk robe, smile sharp as glass. "Daniel, dear, I thought we resolved this." "Resolved?" I held up the violation. "I'm being fined for marking what's mine." "It creates hostility," she said. "And my son, he's home only temporarily." "Then he can temporarily use visitor parking," I said. Her smile vanished. "You'll regret this." "Maybe, but not tonight." I went home, typed a brief note to my old law school buddy turned HOA attorney, Monica Delgado. "Need quick eyes on easement versus enforcement boundaries. Paid consult." She replied in 12 minutes. "Bring documents Monday. Don't engage with board meanwhile." By the weekend, I'd mapped every lot within 50 feet, highlighted similar easement wording. 6 others had the same clause, private use, misclassified as common ground. I photocopied everything, bound it with clips, labeled it pattern evidence. When Monica saw the file, she whistled low. "They're playing fast and loose. You could take this to state ombuds, but let's build leverage first." She slid me a coffee, black as intent. You ever think of buying their debt? I blinked. Their what? HOA has outstanding legal judgments they assign to collection agencies. Those agencies sell at discount. If you acquire one, you become the creditor, gives you standing and leverage. I smiled for the first time in weeks. How much are we talking? Maybe $5,000 for a $10,000 note, worth every penny if you play it right. That night, I couldn't sleep. Ruth's old photo sat on my desk, the one where she's holding the house keys. You'd have told me to fight smart, I murmured. The streetlight flickered outside like an omen or approval. By dawn, I had a plan that didn't involve shouting, threats, or spray paint. It involved ink, signatures, and the slow grind of lawful revenge. Monica connected me with a contact named Leon, a collections broker out of Flagstaff. He spoke like a man who'd spent too many hours with spreadsheets and debt portfolios. You're lucky, he said over the phone. Cedar Ridge HOA sold 3 delinquent accounts last quarter. I've got 2 still open, $5,000 even, and you hold a $10,000 lien. I wired the payment that afternoon. The transaction logged as Whitaker Consulting, LLC. Clean, legal, and boring. The kind of camouflage I love. For weeks, I let it simmer. I parked. Legally, mowed on schedule, even waved at the Penningtons. Their son's Porsche stayed welded to my spot like arrogance on wheels. Each time I passed it, I imagined a timer ticking. When I finally mailed the HOA's accounting officer my notice of assignment, I kept the cover letter concise. Please direct all payment inquiries and communications concerning account number CR 2019-117 to Whitaker Consulting LLC, assignee of record per ARS 433817. Within 72 hours, my phone rang. It was Klein, the HOA president, his tone faux cordial. Daniel, there's been some misunderstanding. These assignments usually go through our counsel. Understood, I said. But your bylaws don't prohibit third-party acquisition, just making sure records stay accurate. A pause. Then, you're making this personal. No, Mr. Klein. You did, the day you fined me for property I own. He hung up without another word. The next evening, Monica and I met in her office, a converted bungalow that smelled like toner and peppermint. She flipped through the papers, tapping each page with her pen. They'll try to call a special meeting, maybe accuse you of harassment. Don't bite. Let them stack procedural errors. The state ombuds loves procedural errors. 2 days later, the harassment began. A citation for trash bin visibility. Another for fence paint inconsistency, the same paint approved 3 years ago. Then came the anonymous wellness check. 2 officers at my door, polite but uneasy. Sir, your HOA expressed concern for your mental well-being. I laughed. I'm fine. You can note that in your report. When they left, I watched their cruiser roll past the Penningtons' driveway. Curtains twitched. I documented everything. Date, time, badge numbers, even the smell of the officers' radios, ozone and static. I kept calm for the same reason engineers double-check load calculations. Panic kill. Structure. That weekend, my neighbor and closest friend, Harold Dunn, dropped by with his thermos of coffee. Heard about the citations, he said. You planning to move? Not yet. I've got work to finish. Harold was 73, retired firefighter, lungs like rusted pipes. He leaned on the railing. Don't let him push you out. Ruth wouldn't have stood for it. I know, I said quietly. By mid-June, the HOA scheduled a disciplinary hearing. I attended with Monica, who wore her lucky navy jacket. The board sat behind a folding table, 5 members, faces pinched. Klein opened with pomp. Mr. Whitaker, your repeated non-compliance has escalated to a level requiring formal review. I placed a recorder on the table. This meeting's being documented for accuracy. Arizona's a one-party consent state. You're fine. Knowledge nugget number 2. In Arizona and other one-party states, recording a conversation is lawful if one participant consents, which in this case was me. Klein blinked. That's highly irregular. So are your maps, I said, sliding copies across the table. County certified. They show my spot as deeded private use, which makes your fines unenforceable. I'll be expecting refunds plus interest. Silence stretched. Monica watched like a hawk, pen poised. Then Mrs. Pennington spoke, voice syruped with venom. "Your behavior disrupts community harmony." I looked at her son, sitting smug behind her. "So does parking where you don't belong." The hearing adjourned in chaos. Outside, Monica grinned. "They'll double down. Let them. You've got leverage now." That night, I drafted a timeline. Parking dispute, false fines, harassment pattern, debt assignment. The pattern was airtight. My leverage was the lien. If they defaulted on any owed payments, I could file to foreclose against common assets, not to take them, but to force compliance. The next few weeks were pure attrition. Morris, citations, online rumors. An unsigned letter slipped under my door. "Sell now while you can." I didn't respond. Instead, I filed a quiet notice with the county recorder. Lien holder Whitaker Consulting LLC reserves right of action. Public, searchable, and fully legal. By August, the Porsche vanished, towed at last, ironically, for extended guest parking violation. I almost laughed. But the board wasn't done. They announced a special assessment to cover unexpected legal expenditures, $400 per homeowner, a last attempt to refill their pockets before the fall. That's when Monica called. "Dan, you ready to make your move?" I looked at Ruth's magnolia blooming late that year. "Yeah," I said. "Time to show them what real ownership means." We met at dawn on September 2nd, the air still cool enough to smell of damp concrete and pine. Monica had drafted the filings overnight. Notice of default on assigned account number CR 2019-117, Cedar Ridge HOA versus Whitaker Consulting LLC. Legalese for, "You're out of compliance with your own debt." "I give them 48 hours, she said, sipping from her thermos. "Then we file a petition for judicial confirmation. No seizure, no foreclosure, just a judge's stamp saying you're owed payment, and that they owe you answers." The engineer in me appreciated clean symmetry. They'd fined me for property that wasn't theirs. Now I held their debt, and they'd defaulted. The equation balanced. But justice delayed is still pain. The harassment had left grooves in me. Sleep light, nerves tight, mailbox dread. I'd started keeping Ruth's photo in my truck for grounding. Some mornings I'd talk to it. "Almost there," I'd whisper. When the board ignored Monica's demand letter, we filed. The courthouse clerk, a young guy with nervous energy, raised an eyebrow at the defendant's name. "HOA as debtor? That's new?" I smiled. "You'd be surprised how often they overextend." 2 weeks later, the board received the stamped summons. Word spread like wildfire through Cedar Ridge. By day 3, half the neighborhood knew. Harold came by laughing so hard he wheezed. "You suing them?" "Not exactly," I said. "Just asking the court to recognize who owes whom." He chuckled, wiping his eyes. "About time someone did." Knowledge nugget number 3. Under Arizona law, an HOA is a nonprofit corporation subject to debt obligations. If it defaults on an assigned account, the assignee has standing to seek payment like any other creditor. Then, as Monica predicted, they panicked. Klein circulated an emergency email claiming I was threatening community solvency. He called for a vote to suspend my privileges. Pool, gym, clubhouse. I printed the email and attached it to my case file. Retaliation documented, time-stamped, and dated. The night before the hearing, Harold stopped by with his usual coffee. "They're rattled," he said. "Klein's been calling everyone." "Let him," I said. "Tomorrow, we start the clock." September 22nd. HOA board meeting, 6 o'clock p.m., community center. The parking lot filled early. People wanted a show. I carried a single gray file box labeled Exhibits 117. Inside, deeds, maps, letters, emails, photos, even the crumpled trash bin citation. Every grievance now transformed into evidence. The meeting opened with Klein's performative calm. "Mr. Whitaker," he said into the microphone, "you've brought litigation against this association. Do you have any comment before we vote on sanctions?" I set the file box on the table with a deliberate snap. "I do." I handed copies of my court filings to each board member. "This isn't litigation, it's accountability. You've fined residents for property outside your authority, enforced rules selectively, and defaulted on obligations. I have the county and court recognizing that debt now belongs to me." Gasps rippled through the audience. Someone whispered, "He owns the debt?" Mrs. Pennington stood, trembling with indignation. "This is extortion." "No," I said evenly. "This is the cost of ignoring your own bylaws." I clicked a small recorder on the table, red light glowing. "For transparency, this meeting is being documented per association policy." Klein's composure cracked. "You can't just—" "Actually," Monica interjected, stepping forward, "Section 4.3 of your own code allows recording for official minutes." The room erupted in murmurs. I met eyes with Harold in the back. He gave me a slow nod, the kind firefighters reserve for controlled burns, dangerous but necessary. When the board voted to adjourn abruptly, I knew I had them. They'd acted under duress, mid-hearing, without quorum. Another procedural error, another nail. That night, I received 3 texts from unknown numbers. "You're ruining everything. Sell while you can, and you'll regret this." I screenshotted each, logged them under Exhibit 18, and emailed them to Monica. Her reply came in minutes. "Don't engage. Tomorrow, county inspector arrives for unrelated audit. Might get interesting." She was right. The next morning, a white county SUV rolled up, seal on the door, clipboard on the dash. The inspector introduced himself as Officer Ramirez, Community Compliance. "Routine audit, Mr. Whitaker. Several complaints about HOA maintenance discrepancies." "Happy to help," I said, leading him around. He noted cracked sidewalks, a rusted playground chain, and outdated fire extinguishers. "If this is representative, they're out of compliance with safety standards." I didn't smile. I just said, "You might want to check their insurance renewals too." That was the beginning of the domino line. And just before Ramirez left, he turned to me and said quietly, "Between you and me, you've been filing everything by the Oak. Keep it that way. It'll matter soon." By October, the dominoes were wobbling. Ramirez's audit had triggered an automatic review by the county's risk management office. Within a week, Cedar Ridge's insurer requested documentation of safety compliance and fiduciary integrity. Translation: prove your paperwork or lose your coverage. For an HOA, that's like oxygen running low. Monica texted me the news with a single word: leverage. Still, I stayed quiet, biding time. Ruth used to say patience was an engineer's secret weapon. You let pressure build until it moves what brute force can't. I spent evenings sanding the porch railing, pretending life was normal, while Klein and his cronies scrambled. One Tuesday night, Harold stopped by, breathing heavier than usual. "They're spinning, Dan. Emergency meetings, closed doors, even rumor of resignations. You lit a fuse." "Not a fuse," I said, looking up from my sanding. "A countdown." He grinned. "Same difference." At the next public meeting, fewer people sat on the board side of the room. Klein wore the same navy tie he always did, habit or superstition. He started with practiced solemnity. "We're aware of certain regulatory reviews, but rest assured the association remains financially sound." Someone in the audience scoffed. Another shouted, "Then why'd my insurance letter say coverage pending renewal review?" I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The crowd did it for me. Midway through, Mrs. Pennington stood to her full height, trembling with barely contained fury. "This man," she said, pointing at me, "is tearing this community apart. He's weaponized the law." "No," I replied quietly, but the microphone caught it. "I just read what you signed." The line hit like a gavel strike. Knowledge nugget number 4. In most states, HOA boards operate as fiduciaries. They must act with loyalty, care, and obedience to governing documents. Breach of these duties can void decisions and expose members to personal liability. By the following week, the insurer's letter became public. Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. Coverage suspended pending verification of governance compliance. 3 lines that changed everything. I didn't celebrate. Instead, I pulled Monica aside. If they crumble completely, the neighborhood suffers too. Trash pickup, pool maintenance, all of it. She nodded. "That's your next move. Use the leverage to reform, not destroy." Her words landed. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about restoring balance, protecting the same streets Ruth loved. Then came the retaliation spike. My mailbox was pried open twice. Someone dumped paint thinner on the edge of my driveway. A neighbor's kid found tire tracks across my lawn. I filed reports, installed a small camera, and sent the footage to the sheriff's office. No confrontation, no anger, just procedure. The video caught a clear shot one night. The Porsche, same red gleam, pulling halfway into my yard before reversing. I printed the still and filed it under harassment log entry number 29. Klein called an extraordinary session for October 18th, promising final resolution of ongoing disputes. Monica leaned over the agenda and whispered, "They'll try to revoke your membership or something flashy. Be ready." "I am," I said, feeling that steady hum before impact. "They've forgotten who holds their debt." The night arrived cold and windy. Rain threatened, but never came. The hall lights buzzed overhead, flickering like nerves. I walked in with one envelope, my trump card. The session opened with Klein clearing his throat. "This board moves to consider disciplinary removal of Mr. Whitaker due to actions harmful to community stability." Before he could continue, I slid the envelope across the table. "Before you vote, you might want to read this." He opened it. Inside, notaries. "Ed notice of intent to execute creditor rights under the assigned lien." The paper bore the county seal and a certified timestamp. His face drained of color. "You wouldn't dare." "I don't have to," I said. "This document gives me limited control over association assets tied to that debt, including the meeting hall lease, which means technically, right now, you're sitting in property controlled by my company." The room gasped. Cameras flashed. Ramirez, the county inspector, stood quietly in the back, arms folded, badge visible. I looked at him. "Would you confirm the document's legitimacy, officer?" He nodded. "It's valid and recorded. Reversal number 1 complete." I gathered my papers, feeling the weight shift. "Meeting's over," I said, voice calm. "You'll hear from my attorney regarding next steps, but I recommend you start preparing transparency reforms, quickly." The rain finally broke as I walked to my truck, drops ticking against metal like applause. Harold waited in the lot. "That the sound of justice, Dietz?" he asked. "Not yet," I said, climbing in. "Just the first crack." The following morning, the news broke wider than I ever expected. A local paper ran a headline, "Homeowner legally acquires HOA debt, halts board proceedings." It wasn't sensational, just factual, but the comments section caught fire. By noon, neighbors from other subdivisions were at my door, asking for copies of the filings. I shared what I could, and reminded them to get proper counsel. Inside Cedar Ridge, though, chaos brewed. 3 board members resigned within 48 hours. Klein held on, stubborn and desperate, sending late-night emails about rogue actors undermining governance. I archived every one. That week became a slow-motion war. I'd wake to find new violation tags fluttering on my fence, identical handwriting, no signatures. The HOA website quietly posted an emergency fee adjustment proposal to cover unanticipated legal costs. I printed the notice and highlighted the line where they forgot to cite their authors. Righty. Harold dropped by, shaking his head. "They're doubling down again. You sure this doesn't end ugly?" "Not if I keep it procedural," I said, flipping through a binder. "Paper cuts, not punches." Still, it wore me down. Every mailbox clank jolted me. Every evening felt like waiting for another shoe to drop. I found myself sitting on the porch longer, watching the magnolia sway under porch light gold, thinking about Ruth, how she'd made this place feel like home, not a battlefield. "I'm still keeping the promise," I'd whisper, "even if it's messy." Then one night, at 2:17 a.m., my camera pinged an alert. A figure crouched near my mailbox, flashlight trembling. I watched live as the person taped something to the post and hurried off. When I stepped outside, the air smelled like damp asphalt and fear. The paper read, "Sell or pay." I saved it in a plastic sleeve, logged it as entry number 34, then called the sheriff. The officer arrived 20 minutes later, heavy boots on gravel. "You've got quite the file," he said after flipping through the binder. "I'll add this to the report. Might tie it to earlier complaints." He paused. "They're poking the wrong bear, Mr. Whitaker. You're handling this right. Keep it clean." Clean was the only way forward. 3 days later, Monica met me at the diner on Route 17. She slid a folder across the booth. "Insurance dropped them officially. No coverage until governance audit clears. That means they can't hire vendors, can't issue certain payments, and can't hold meetings on HOA property without liability exposure. So they're paralyzed, I said. Exactly. You could push foreclosure now. Or, she leaned in, you could draft reform terms and trade the debt for change. The idea lingered like the smell of burnt coffee. Reform, not ruin. Ruth would have chosen that. We worked late that night drafting conditions, mandatory term limits, public BTC, budgets, open meetings, and a new ethics committee chaired by residents. I titled the document Cedar Ridge Restoration Charter. But before we could deliver it, the HOA tried one final strike. They circulated a rumor that I was under investigation for harassment. Flyers appeared at the community mailboxes, unsigned but obviously orchestrated. The ink smudged under my fingers, still fresh. That was the low point. The fear beat I hadn't expected. I started worrying for Harold, for my small group of supporters. If they were willing to smear me, what stopped them from worse? I called Monica, voice tight. What if this spills over? It already has, she said. That's why you finish it now. They've made every wrong move. The next one will be public. That night, I stood in the driveway, wind rustling through the magnolia leaves. I could hear faint music from another yard, the kind of muffled Americana that smells like barbecue smoke and nostalgia. I breathed it in and felt something settle inside me. Resolve, not rage. The next morning, I printed the restoration charter on heavy paper, embossed with a gold notary seal. At the bottom, I left a single line open. Accepted by vote of Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. Effective upon execution. The set piece was ready, and as I sealed the envelope, I thought of one more question for the audience of my story. If a community's rules become the weapon that harms it, should the people dismantle the system or reform it from within? Drop your take below. I read every comment. The October wind carried dust across the cul-de-sac the morning I delivered the envelope. I walked it down personally, slipping it into the HOA's drop box beside the clubhouse door. The motion-activated light flickered to life, catching the embossed seal as it slid inside. The sound of the metal latch clicking shut was final, like a trigger resetting. Monica called as I was walking back. They'll have to acknowledge receipt in their next meeting, and if they don't, then the CU. Anti-audit will, I said. 2 days passed before the inevitable response. An official meeting notice pinned to every community bulletin board. Emergency HOA session. Financial governance review. Public attendance permitted. That was bureaucratic speak for panic. The evening of the meeting, I dressed the same way I would for a court inspection. Button down, clean jeans, boots polished with quiet purpose. Harold rode with me, carrying a thermos that smelled of burnt chicory. They'll expect you to gloat, he said. Don't. I won't, I promised. I'm past that. Inside, every seat was filled. Even residents who'd ignored months of conflict were there now. Curious, tense. The projector hummed softly. The board table sat half empty. Klein remained, pale but defiant, flanked by Mrs. Pennington and one remaining ally. When he opened the meeting, his voice was taut. This session will address financial exposure resulting from recent legal developments. I stood before he could twist the narrative further. You mean the legal recognition of your debt default? A murmur spread through the crowd. Klein tried to cut me off. You are not recognized. Officer Ramirez, standing near the side wall, spoke calmly. Mr. Whitaker is within his rights as an affected creditor to present documentation. The authority in his tone flattened any rebuttal. I stepped forward, placing the restoration charter on the table. This document outlines the only path that keeps Cedar Ridge solvent and insured. Adopt these reforms, and I'll release the lien. Mrs. Pennington laughed sharply. This is extortion under a smile. Monica, seated in the audience, spoke evenly. No, ma'am. It's negotiation backed by recorded evidence and due process. I projected slides, dates, fines, photos, and the original plat map with Lot 22B circled in red. You fined me for this spot, I said, pointing. Here's the county's certification showing its deeded private use easement. Here's the insurer's suspension letter. Here's your bylaw breach log. Each error is verifiable, time-stamped, and notarized. A few residents whispered to each other. One man raised his hand. So, if they sign this, what happens? Liability ends. Fees drop. Transparency begins, I replied. Then I turned back to Klein. Or you can refuse, and within 10 business days, I execute my rights on the lien, freezing association accounts until payment is resolved. Either way, I follow the law. He stared at the document as if it might burn him. You think you can hold this community hostage? I stepped closer, voice low but clear. You already did. I'm just changing the ransom terms. The room went still. Ramirez broke the silence, clipboard in hand. For record, all presented evidence matches county records. No fraud apparent. His verification was the neutral stamp that sealed the moment. Visual beat number 1 locked in. A gray folder resting beside the HOA's gavel, their authority eclipsed by paperwork. Harold whispered behind me, "You've got them boxed." "Almost," I murmured. "They still need an exit." As the meeting adjourned, several homeowners approached quietly. One woman, Ms. Tran, handed me a folded note. "We've wanted change for years. Thank you for not burning it down." I drove home in silence. Rain tapped the windshield, steady, unhurried, like the world exhaling. The magnolia swayed under the porch light again, its leaves slick with silver. I realized for the first time in months that I wasn't angry anymore, just ready. For everyone watching, I'll ask you straight. When power breaks trust, is redemption still worth chasing? Or should justice simply end it? Tell me what you'd choose. The following Monday, I received an email from Klein marked urgent, proposal discussion. It was short, just 7 words. Meet at the community hall, 4 p.m. Monica insisted on coming, and Harold tagged along with his steady thermos, calling it moral ballast. The air inside the hall was thick with the smell of copier tuner and fear. The fluorescent lights buzzed as Klein stood behind the podium, the HOA seal slightly crooked behind him. He looked older, the weight of paperwork finally visible in his shoulders. "I've read your charter," he began. "It's comprehensive." "It's lawful," I corrected. He rubbed his temple. "Our council says signing it admits wrongdoing." Monica's voice was calm steel. "It acknowledges correction, not guilt. There's a difference, and it could save what's left of your board." Mrs. Pennington sat off to the side, arms crossed, glaring holes through me. "You've humiliated us publicly." "No," I said. "I documented you privately. The public part happened when you ignored your own bylaws." That silenced her, but only briefly. She slammed a palm on the table. "You can't possibly expect—" Klein raised a hand. "Enough, Martha." His tone was weary. "We've caused this ourselves." That was the first honest thing he'd said in months. He motioned toward the back of the room where Officer Ramirez stood again, this time in plain clothes, but still carrying that quiet authority. "Officer, you're here as a neutral observer, correct?" Ramirez nodded. "If this becomes an official signing, I'll log it as witnessed for the county's record." Klein inhaled deeply, exhaled slower. "Mr. Whitaker, if I sign this, what happens to the lien?" "It's released within 24 hours, I said. "Recorded, sealed, and verified. You'll still answer to the insurer and auditors, but you'll keep your charter intact, and the community keeps functioning." He stared at the pages again, then at me. "You could have ruined us." "I still might," I said, not as a threat, but a reminder. At 4:43 p.m. he signed. Ramirez countersigned as witness. Monica dated and notarized. The echo of her stamp hitting the page was the sound of a hammer driving truth into place. Visual beat number 2, Rain B. Aided window. Document stamped beneath flickering fluorescent light. The image burned itself into memory. When we stepped outside, the clouds broke apart, late sunlight streaking through like something divine. Harold clapped my shoulder. "You done?" "Almost," I said. "Now comes the fallout." And fallout came fast. By Wednesday, 2 local news crews ran segments on the Cedar Ridge reform. Footage from the meeting spread online, and homeowners from other subdivisions began asking how to replicate the charter. Comments filled every thread, some praising, some angry, all engaged. Then came the domino collapse. The HOA's treasurer disclosed unreported expenditures totaling $38,700, unauthorized consulting fees, inflated landscaping costs, and miscellaneous reimbursements. The insurer responded with a cancellation notice, pending internal reform. County auditors followed. Klein resigned quietly 2 days later, citing health reasons. Mrs. Pennington tried to rally the remaining members but found no quorum left to command. Within a week, a provisional committee, led by Ms. Tran, was elected to oversee the transition. She called me that night. "You're free of this, Daniel, but would you help us finish the audit?" I hesitated. "I'm not looking for a seat." "Not a seat," she said gently. "Just guidance. We want to rebuild right." I looked out at the street, still damp from a light drizzle. The magnolia's leaves glistened under the street lamp. Ruth would have wanted this ending, the slow rebuild, not the bonfire. Before I said yes, I turned back to the camera on my desk and spoke softly, the same way I always do when telling these stories. If you've ever been cornered by power hiding behind paperwork, remember, it collapses fastest when you stay patient, factual, and lawful. Rage burns quick, records last forever. But tell me this, when reform follows revenge, do you call it justice or mercy? 2 months later, Cedar Ridge felt different. The mailbox flags no longer drooped with fear. Kids rode scooters down the cul-de-sac again. The new interim board met every other Saturday in the open. No locked doors, no secret votes. Minutes were published within 24 hours, and for the first time in years, homeowners actually showed up to help instead of to complain. I kept my distance, content to watch. The lien was officially released, filed on November 6th at 10:14 a.m. I kept the receipt framed on my office wall beside Ruth's photograph. Her smile in that picture looked less like memory and more like permission, like she knew I'd kept the house and the promise. Monica dropped by to deliver the last set of audit results. "They've agreed to the reforms," she said, smiling. "Term limits, open votes, and a 3-year rollback on unjust fines. You did it." "We did it," I corrected. "You, me, and every neighbor who stopped pretending silence was safety." Harold joined us later on the porch. He carried 2 mugs and poured one out quietly by the magnolia roots. "For her," he said. I nodded. "For her." We sat there until dusk, listening to sprinklers hiss and cicadas start their rhythm. For the first time in months, the only paper on my table was a folded letter, an invitation to speak at a state homeowners conference about community reform and accountability. I wasn't sure I'd go. I'd rather build something than talk about what broke. Still, I typed a single sentence at the bottom of the draft notes. "Justice isn't loud, it's documented." That became the title of my talk. The local paper ran a follow-up story a week later. Cedar Ridge HOA adopts transparency charter after landmark dispute. It quoted Ms. Tran. "We learned that the law isn't our enemy. Ignorance is. Mr. Whitaker just reminded us of that." Visual beat number 3 came quietly one evening when I walked to the community hall for the first meeting under the new rules. A young couple was posting flyers for a neighborhood restoration day. I watched as the new board president stamped the first official notice under the magnolia emblem. The stamp cracked against the board like a closing door, and an opening one. In the months that followed, the changes held. Budgets posted online, audits completed, insurance reinstated. Even the Penningtons sold their house and moved away quietly, leaving the red Porsche out of sight for good. One evening, I stood under the porch light and spoke into my small camera again, closing the story as I began it, with the facts, not the fury. If you believe I fought the right way and this is how it should end, say a few words in the comments for your friend. Subscribe so future stories reach you first. As responsible citizens, share this so others learn that paperwork and patience can fix what rage can't. That's on us. When I finally turned off the light, the magnolia shimmered in the dark breeze like it was whispering something I could almost hear. You kept it. You made it right. And that's how Cedar Ridge changed. One deed, one signature, one act of quiet defiance at a time. The next morning, I labeled a new binder, Case Number 2, Pending, because somewhere another HOA was already overstepping, and I still had ink in the pen,